As the caravan traveled across the hot desert, Joseph was carried farther and farther away from his home. Though he was heartbroken and uncertain about his future, God was with him every step of the journey. What his brothers meant for evil, God was beginning to use for a greater purpose. When the caravan arrived in Egypt, Joseph was put up for sale in the busy slave market. Far from his family and his homeland, he stood alone, unsure of what would happen next. An important Egyptian official named Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard, saw Joseph and bought him from the Ishmaelite traders. Though Joseph had been betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery, God had not abandoned him. This was the beginning of God's plan to raise Joseph from a slave to a ruler in Egypt. As time passed, the Lord blessed everything Joseph did, and Potiphar placed him in charge of his entire household. Joseph was faithful, honest, and hardworking, but Potiphar's wife repeatedly tried to tempt Joseph. Day after day, she urged him to betray his master and sin against God. Joseph refused, saying, "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" One day when they were alone in the house, she grabbed his cloak. Joseph immediately fled, leaving his cloak behind rather than giving in to temptation. When Potiphar's wife saw that Joseph had escaped, she kept his cloak as false evidence. She called the servants and accused Joseph of trying to attack her. When Potiphar returned home, she repeated the same lie. Although Joseph had done nothing wrong, Potiphar became angry and ordered that Joseph be thrown into the king's prison. Once again, Joseph suffered because of the evil actions of others. But even in prison, God did not leave him. The Lord was with Joseph, and his greater plan was still unfolding. Even in prison, the Lord was with Joseph. God showed him kindness and gave him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Seeing Joseph's honesty, wisdom, and faithfulness, the warden placed him in charge of all the other prisoners. Joseph was trusted to manage everything that happened in the prison. Though he was still imprisoned for a crime he did not commit, God continued to bless him. Every step of Joseph's journey was preparing him for the great purpose God had planned for his life. While Joseph was in prison, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker were imprisoned with him. One night, each of them had a troubling dream, but no one could explain what they meant. Joseph said, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." With God's help, Joseph explained that the cupbearer would be restored to Pharaoh's service in 3 days, but the baker would be executed. 3 days later, everything happened exactly as Joseph had said. Before the cupbearer left prison, Joseph asked him, "Please remember me when you stand before Pharaoh." But after he was released, the cupbearer forgot Joseph. 2 years later, Pharaoh had two mysterious dreams that no one in Egypt could explain. In the first dream, 7 healthy cows were swallowed by 7 thin, starving cows. In the second, 7 full heads of grain were consumed by 7 withered heads of grain. Pharaoh was deeply troubled. None of Egypt's wise men could interpret the dreams. Then the chief cupbearer finally remembered Joseph. He told Pharaoh about the Hebrew prisoner who had correctly interpreted his dream in prison. At once, Pharaoh sent for Joseph. He was quickly brought out of the prison, shaved, changed into clean clothes, and taken into Pharaoh's presence. Standing before Pharaoh, Joseph humbly said, "I cannot interpret dreams, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Joseph explained that the 7 healthy cows and 7 full heads of grain represented 7 years of great abundance. The 7 thin cows and the withered heads of grain represented 7 years of severe famine that would follow. He advised Pharaoh to appoint a wise man to store grain during the years of plenty so the nation would survive the famine. Pharaoh recognized that God's spirit was with Joseph and declared, "There is no one as wise and discerning as you." He placed his own signet ring on Joseph's hand, dressed him in fine linen, and made him governor over all Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. In a single day, God lifted Joseph from a prison cell to the palace. What his brothers meant for evil, God used for good, fulfilling the purpose he had planned all along.